Welcome to Leaders' Questions, where Ireland's leaders face the heat, the pressure and the toughest questions of the day.
Parents of children with special needs are constantly coming up against brick walls while trying to access essential services for their children. The scandal of children with scoliosis and spina bifida left in pain for their operations has been one of this government's most damning failures. The heartbreaking stories of people being left behind often involve excruciating waits for assessment of needs, being forced to enter lotteries to draw a secure, suitable school place, and being denied basic medical care. Taoiseach, I want to raise with you the case of 6-year-old Tiernan Power Murphy from County Waterford. Tiernan is autistic. He's been living in severe pain since last October. He needs 3 teeth removed. Tiernan's parents have been told that their little boy could be waiting up to 10 years for this procedure. 10 years for a 6-year-old boy. This news was broken to them by a public dentist. Tiernan lives in such daily agony that he can barely chew food or sleep. And his father, Eamon, has described the effect of all of this on his little boy. He says he's usually the best in the world, usually the happiest fella. Now to see him like this, not eating properly, afraid to eat because it hurts to chew, screaming and throwing himself to the ground, hitting himself, it's horrible for him. Taoiseach, no child should be left in such a terrible, traumatic situation, and no parent should have to watch their child endure this agony. My colleague, Oireachtas David Cullinan, has contacted the HSE on Tiernan's case, and Taoiseach, a solution needs to be found for this child, and it needs to be found quickly. But Tiernan isn't alone, Taoiseach, far from it. He's just one of thousands of children being failed by the state, one of thousands on dental and orthodontic waiting lists. That's thousands of children waiting for dental surgery or even to get an appointment. A mockery is being made of Childcare wait targets, and in the most severe cases there are more than 7,000 children waiting for more than a year for treatment that they need so badly, and 1,100 children waiting more than 4 years. These children are on orthodontic lists for jaw disorders and serious teeth problems. So Taoiseach, it's very clear that paediatric dentistry is in real crisis, not serving children and young people generally, but the problem is even worse when it comes to a child or a young person with special needs. So a proper solution needs to be put in place so that all of these children, like Tiernan, get access to timely, specialised care. Government needs to get to grips with the wider issue of children waiting for dental treatment. Caithfí an rialtas gníomh pránach a ghlacha, maidir le leanaí atá fanacht sa fanacht cuireadh agus cóir riachtanach fiachlóra. So Taoiseach, what will the government do to address all of this? We don't have the number of dentists and dental surgeons we need. There are just 23 HSE consultants and just 250 public-only dentists. That's 25% less than in 2006. What action will government take to deal with this crisis? And Taoiseach, what action will you take in relation to Tiernan Power Murphy?
Thank you, Deputy. Before the Taoiseach responds, Deputy, yesterday, just by way for new members and those who aren't aware, when we actually give details of a minor and it goes on the record, we must be cognizant, albeit I expect it's with parental consent, we have to be cognizant of that minor reaching the age of majority and not agreeing with that. So we do caution that when you use private details such as diagnosis of autism in relation to minors, I'd ask all members to consider it. Thank you.
To be clear, that has been sought and secured, and this,
I absolutely
this case is on
Deputy,
the public record, but I appreciate
that. Just so that everybody is aware of the consideration that needs to be given. Taoiseach to respond. Thank you.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would agree with the Deputy that it is absolutely unacceptable that a young child in these circumstances, Tiernan Power Murphy, should be denied urgent oral healthcare and dental healthcare in terms of the extraction of teeth. And the fact that we're dealing with a condition of autism as well exacerbates the unacceptable nature of this. And my understanding is, and Minister Mary Butler has been in touch with the HSE, spoken to HSE. The HSE, I understand, is engaging with the family on this, and a solution will be found, and will be found immediately in respect of this specific case, as it should be, and I believe the Regional Executive Officer has acted on this. My understanding is the case was not elevated to the Regional Executive Officer. That doesn't take away from the broader issue of oral healthcare, dental healthcare and orthodontics more generally. And this has been an issue engaging between Department and the IDA, the Irish Dental Association, for quite some time. There was initiatives taken last year in respect of endeavouring to break logjams. Over 200 million now is invested annually in the provision of oral healthcare. And I do believe when such large sums of money are now allocated to various services, that there has to be and I'm saying this from the government's perspective, it's not a resource issue. There are fundamental issues within dentistry, I accept that. But also within services. When large-scale allocations are being made, the idea that situations like this cannot be resolved, I don't think is acceptable either. And there has to be a more responsive approach. And I will be talking to the Chief Executive Officer of the Health Service Executive in respect of this, who, to be fair to him, does endeavour to be solution-driven in resolving cases of this kind, because particularly children with special needs, very often the additional needs compound the condition and the experience for the child in terms of the particular issue they may have. In this case, the necessity to extract 3 teeth, the child being in extraordinary pain on an ongoing basis. These issues should be elevated and should be resolved. There's enough resources to resolve them, in my view. The broader issue needs to be resolved also. Go bonúsach tá rialtas tá annachhuid inis a chahabh ó heh catachas ag an rialtas cuasaí adachis, cuasaí sláinte, agus go háirithe I ggóthaigh lenaí le gána speisialta, agus breise annachhuid aige dán inis. Agus caithfidh sé caitheamid, caithfidh an choras bheith anán, cásna den taiseo a réiteach agus a réiteach go tapig. I would just say more generally, if you look, for example, at the education budget now, which is quite substantial, 25% of that education budget is allocated to special education. Now, the general situation is changing in terms of the growth as a percentage of population of people with disabilities more generally, and in terms of children. If you look at the 2016 census and the 2022 census, there's been a very significant increase in the number of people presenting with disabilities or with conditions that reduce capacity. And it's quite an extraordinary increase in terms of the general population. It's also quite significant in terms of children. That means we have to ramp up significantly expenditure and resources, which we have.
Thank you.
I mean, if you look at special education alone, the number of extra classes, extra teachers is quite significant compared to 2 or 3 years ago.
So, Taoiseach, and I'm glad that you agree with me that this situation is entirely unacceptable, that children are left without access to urgent dental care. Also welcome the fact that you will, as I understand it, make a direct intervention in respect of Tiernan, because a solution needs to be found. When I'm putting the question to the Taoiseach with respect not to the whip, I ask that you make an intervention, and I would appreciate that you do that. But you see, the problem is that we can't bring all 7,000 stories of all of those children waiting for more than a year, or the 1,100 who have been waiting for 4 years. Yeah. We can't, sure, we'd monopolise, we'd do nothing else if we were to do that. So I am concerned that you're not recognising the problem or your part in it. You see, you're not a commentator, Taoiseach. You've been in government now for a very considerable period of time. And I said to you that we have 25% less public dentists than we had in 2006. Therein lies the root of the problem.
Taoiseach to respond. Thank you, Deputy.
Just more broadly, as I said to you earlier, the Minister for State, Mary Butler, has been involved in this case, has spoken to the Regional Executive Officer, and as I've said to you already, prior to this being raised, the HSE has acted and has advised the Minister, and I think, and the senior ministers, and Minister Jennifer McNeill has also been, I think, in touch with the HSE, and the family have been advised by the HSE that this matter will be resolved. So, in this specific case, the intervention has happened, and the Minister, Mary Butler, has been advised that it will be resolved. And I will discuss the more broader issue with the Minister for Health and with the Chief Executive Officer of the HSE in terms of cases involving such as this, and more broadly in terms of the broader dental situation, and also in terms of children with additional needs.
Thank you, Taoiseach. We now move to Deputy Ivana Bacik of the Labour Party.
Taoiseach, every week brings yet more news of government failure as the housing crisis further spirals out of your control. This week we saw daft.ie reporting that rents have risen by a staggering 43% since the pandemic. At the weekend, right on schedule, we retreated to the latest top-of-the-head idea from the government. First it was tax breaks for developers, then it was beds in sheds, and this time your housing minister made a rare appearance to say that he wants to appoint a maverick person to kick-start the delivery of homes, a sort of fixer-in-chief. Now, in 2021, Taoiseach, when you launched Housing for All, you described it as forming the basis for a long-term, sustainable housing system for this and future generations. We all thought the Minister for Housing would be the fixer-in-chief. So is this decision now to appoint an outsider to head up your new Strategic Housing Activation Office an admission that your housing policy has failed? Taoiseach, Fianna Fáil has held the housing brief for more than 4 years now. 4 years of failures acknowledged even by your own government departments. Department of Finance figures show that planning permissions for apartments fell by 1/3 in the first 9 months of last year. And the Department of Public Expenditure says this week that your Croí Cónaithe city scheme was too small to ensure that apartment building could be viable. We're increasingly hearing from your own TDs the mantra that international finance will not invest in building apartments here unless they can get a higher rate of return. But Taoiseach, that is code for saying that renters will have to pay higher rents. And that's what was so dishonest about Fianna Fáil's general election campaign on housing. You misled us all on the figures for housing completions, continuously promising 40,000 new builds last year when the true figure was 10,000 less. You did not make proposals for tax breaks for developers until after the election, and you did not talk about rent increases or the growing crisis in apartment financing. Taoiseach, the truth is there are solutions which lie in a radical reset of housing policy, as your own Housing Commission recommended. If private sector and international capital are not engaged in financing the building of apartments here, then the state must step in, because only the state has the deep pockets necessary to underwrite the true level of risk and of investment needed. The market has failed, and ordinary workers and renters cannot bear the level of rents that speculators would want. Apartments constitute vital strategic infrastructure as well as vital homes for our communities. And Taoiseach, alongside our plan to scale up the LDA, Labour proposed several state-led solutions to the apartment financing crisis. Here's one: €140 billion sits on deposit in overnight and demand accounts in our banks. So why aren't we offering people a state-backed solidarity bond to finance housing? And at the same time, the state is salting away €4 billion a year into the Future Ireland Fund. So Taoiseach, will you consider deploying these funds through the Housing Finance Agency, the Strategic Investment Fund and other state funding vehicles to deliver the homes and the apartments that our communities so badly need?
Taoiseach to respond. Please.
Again, I think in the first instance, the bottom line is the state has intervened and has intervened very strongly and assertively in the housing market. The state is the main player, I would argue, in the housing market right now in terms of the level of state investment, and that is increasing and has increased over the last number of years. As I said yesterday, we are at record levels of social housing new builds compared over the last 3 decades. And you can go back and you can compare and contrast. And we need to get that 8,000 plus to about 10,000 new builds and add about 2,000 more in terms of leasing to deal with homelessness cases or indeed new acquisitions also. And you keep saying things that we haven't said, by the way. I've never said that we want to increase rents. I've never said that we want to end the RPZs. Never said it. And I challenged you last week to produce a quote where I said I would end RPZs. And of course you can't find it because it doesn't exist. And I'm very struck by the degree to which the debate gets so easily distorted by commentary and in the public sphere. It's just interesting. There seems to be no space for teasing out issues and discussing issues without the immediate assertion and allegation and branding of a particular comment into a nice box that fits the political slogans and so on, but doesn't really add any solutions to anything. And the real debate in the election was about how to get to 50,000 per annum, because every party accepted the 50,000 figure that the ESRI says we need. You came forward with the National Housing Construction Agency with very little details on it. And even when I met you subsequently around government formation, very little detail on it. No paper, no document. And it seemed to be back to the direct labour approach. That you seem to envisage that there would be a national construction agency which would employ thousands of people, which is going to build homes. I don't think that's feasible in the current era. It's not going to happen. And it would have delayed the process of house building even further. You had further ideas around the LDA, which were unspecified. Now, it took 2 years to legislate for the LDA. My argument in the election with you in the debate was, quite simply, that all of that would delay and disrupt the momentum in trying to get more houses built. We need more houses built. We need now to get the existing agencies, local authorities, approved housing bodies, the LDA, need to get them working and not kind of formulating new schemes, new agencies, which by definition all take time. And that was your proposition. And like when you, for example, you have made comments in terms of my statement about getting private sector investment in. And it's like performance arts in here. Like you'd imagine I'd said something terrible when I said we need to get private sector investment in. But I just want to
Thank you,
say to you,
your time is
you
up.
might well
you can come back in, Deputy Ivana Bacik.
I'm very disappointed by your response because you haven't addressed the substantive points I've raised with you about the need to ensure a state-led response to the crisis in apartment financing. Instead, you engage in dismissing Labour proposals. At least the previous Housing Minister, Darragh O'Brien, accepted that we offered constructive opposition on housing in this House. We supported the LDA. We put forward proposals for transforming the LDA into a genuine vehicle for delivering homes at the scale that's needed. You wouldn't engage with us, Taoiseach. And your dismissive attitude and your increasingly tetchy attitude in this House really indicates exactly why increasingly tetchy, positively frothing with rage at some of the proposals we've made. It's true, you may laugh, Taoiseach, but it's increasingly evident. Taoiseach, you know, in our Labour manifesto, we put forward careful proposals to transform the building.
Your time is up, so the Taoiseach to respond.
Actually, the state is involved in the apartment building area at huge cost. And a genuine debate would actually ask the question, are there better ways of doing it? If there was a genuine debate going on here. I don't know what you mean by turning the LDA into a genuine vehicle, as if it's not genuine now. But I would make the point to you that when I indicated last week, which everybody outside agrees, that we need private sector investment, most economic people are saying it, most experts on housing are saying it, you kind of attacked me for mentioning it. You move straight to tax breaks. But I want to just quote you, and you might benefit from looking at the history of your own party on this. And I quote, "We are creating this process now for bringing in private investment. I hope to launch a new scheme in relation to investment in social housing in the near future, a new process for bringing in investors." Can we guess who said that when he was Minister for Housing? Your current colleague, former leader, Deputy Alan Kelly. Back in the days when AK-47 was firing on all cylinders back then. And when I mentioned it last week, outrage and hyperbole. No, this was before the 2016 election.
Time is up. I call now on Deputy Cian O'Callaghan of the Social Democrats. Cian O'Callaghan. Deputy O'Callaghan.
I've already got my nickname.
Deputy O'Callaghan. Deputy O'Callaghan, please to speak.
Taoiseach, Rady Pete of Lankham and Dan Lambert, manager of NECAP, have recently spoken about their experiences as parents of a child with additional needs. Speaking with Oliver Callan on RTE Radio, they described the challenges that they and thousands of families like them face in battling to get supports for their child. Since their child was 17 months, Rady and Dan realised that she was autistic and non-verbal, and despite this, she will not get the supports that she urgently needs until she is 6.5. The story that Rady and Dan have told and shared mirrors the experience of thousands of other families across the country. After looking for help, their belief that they would get the necessary supports was quickly shattered. From the outset, they were told that their child would not get what she needed in a timely manner. They were advised that they should leave Dublin. They were told that their child would get better support in any other European country and that they would be better off leaving Ireland. They were told that they would have to battle continuously to get access to basic supports, that nothing was going to happen at the appropriate time. All of this resulted in them feeling completely overwhelmed. Taoiseach Rady spoke of how she had to cry and beg as she navigated a grossly under-resourced system, about how trying to figure things out and how the systems work is like a full-time job, about fighting and battling to get to the next step in the process, only to realise when you get there that there's nothing there, about how doing all of this while working and supporting your child is completely and utterly exhausting. Taoiseach Rady and Dan were speaking not just about their experience, but about the experience of thousands of children and families in similar situations. There are 14,221 children overdue an assessment of need, and there are a further 12,920 children waiting on waiting lists for Children's Disability Network teams. Taoiseach, you know that early intervention is key, that there is simply no time to be lost. Children with additional needs are being left behind while their parents jump through hoops to try and access basic services and supports. Last May, I asked you about the 700 vacancies in Children's Disability Network teams, with some areas experiencing staff shortages as high as 60 and even 70%. Taoiseach, how many of these vacant posts have been filled? And when will children with additional needs get the access to basic supports and services that they urgently need?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
I thank the Deputy for raising this issue. And I accept fully that the journey of parents of children with special needs is an extremely challenging, difficult and traumatic one for the parents. They simply have to fight too hard, too long, in terms of access to services and in terms of education. In some cases, not in all, access to school places. And it is my objective as Taoiseach to change this story, and it is a key priority of mine, along with housing and along with child poverty. As a key priorities of my term as Taoiseach and indeed as the wider government. I'm establishing a disability unit in the Department of Taoiseach. We had our first meeting with about 8 ministers early this week. And there will be obviously a disability cabinet subcommittee meeting to follow. And I think all ministers are clear that there has to be a whole of government response to the issue of disability more generally. It's wide, but particular focus on children in education, and then in terms of assessment of need, but more critically, access to therapy services. And in the first instance, what has to happen, in my view, is we have to deal with the assessment of need issue. The 2022 High Court judgment of Ms Justice Phelan in the case of CTM and GA versus the HSE has created a situation where there's huge resources and backlog now in terms of assessment of need, and you're correct on 14,000. That's not tenable. In my view, the legislation has to be brought in to deal with this, and that will happen, and there will be engagement with the House on it, because we have to get a right balance of existing resources to both services and the provision of services, because you don't have to get an assessment indeed to avail of services, and you should have an entitlement to services, even as you're awaiting the assessment of need. The Minister for Education is developing proposals for a school-based therapy service beginning in special schools. And that's a commitment we have made in the programme for government, and that we're going to see through. The CDNT teams and the HSE are continuing to recruit across the 93 CDNT teams. The current recruitment campaign has issued about 145 job offers across key therapy roles. Progress is slow. There's been a 17% increase in staff from 23 to 24, and another 111 are expected to join soon. The vacancy rate has dropped to 21%.
Thank you, Taoiseach. You
by
can come back in.
7.9%. But none of that
O'Callaghan.
is enough, and it's not
Time is up,
adequate.
Taoiseach.
And there will be a relentless focus on this for the lifetime of this government.
Taoiseach, there continues to be a huge level of vacancies. They need to be filled. You keep on blaming the 2022 High Court judgment, which found that your government is in breach of legislation. When are you going to actually get children the access to what they urgently require, rather than blaming that judgment? This Friday, Taoiseach, a group of 50 parents will hold a sleep out outside the Department of Education because their children cannot get the school places that they need. Parents should not have to sleep out in order to assert the rights of their children to access education that they desperately need, Taoiseach. So when is this going to change? When will there be enough school places for children with additional needs? When is the government going to stop failing children with additional needs? And when will the posts on the Disability Children's Network teams that are vacant and empty, when are they going to be filled?
With the CDNT teams, and that recruitment continues. On education, I think it should be acknowledged, Deputy, that there's been a huge increase in public expenditure, rightly so, on special education. It now constitutes 25% of the overall education budget, about 3 billion now. But money doesn't mean a whole lot to people if they're waiting for school places. But we've about 23,000 special needs assistants now in our schools. We've 20,800 special education teachers. The number of special classes has doubled in the last 5 years to 3,336, serving 20,000 students. 11 new special schools have been established. 5 more are planned for this school year, 25-26. And we're going to. And in terms of the September deadline, the Minister for Education is clear that we want to ensure that all children get a place by September. And working with the NCSE, we're going to focus very strongly on that. But on the education side, I can see. There's been significant progress over the last number of years.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
We've just got to make sure that the system is almost automatic.
Taoiseach.
That children shouldn't have to be, or the parents shouldn't have to be.
Taoiseach, your time is up. We now move to Deputy Roderick O'Gorman.
Taoiseach, the last decade has seen a big shift in public policy towards childcare in this country. The state now recognises that the first 5 years are a critical developmental time for young children and has built a range of supports for parents and children so they can give their children the best start in life. And as part of those supports, the state now seeks to make early learning and care accessible and affordable. There's been real progress in recent years. If we look at the doubling of investment in early years, we look at the halving of childcare costs, and we look at the huge increases in the number of parents using the National Childcare Scheme. All those numbers are going in the right direction. But the progress is only as good as the political will behind it. And a lot of the sector, and indeed a lot of parents, are looking at the new programme for government and they're asking, where did that political will go? The new programme for government makes no commitment, absolutely no mention to creating a legal right to the 2 ECC years, despite that commitment being in both of the manifestos of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. So where did the commitment go? Did the independents ask you to drop it? Did Deeper get themselves involved? Or did you just forget all about it? At a time when the loss of childcare professionals from the sector is a key threat to increasing capacity, the programme for government merely commits to a business-as-usual approach to pay increases for staff. And when it comes to the development of a public model of childcare, a policy change that was absolutely central to the general election debates only 4 months ago, the programme for government could not be more vague. There's a promise of an action plan, there's no timeline, no specific numbers. It's a long way from Fine Gael's commitment to 30,000 public childcare places by the end of 2030. And Taoiseach, I'm not fully clear what your own position is on the concept of a public model of childcare, because that's at the heart of this. We've made a lot of progress, but we have still to take that most important step and recognise that only the state can guarantee access to childcare in areas where private or community services haven't been established. A public model of early learning and care is the final step that brings together the various reforms that have been undertaken over the last number of years, and it is that which the new programme for government fails to recognise. So Taoiseach, today I want to ask you, will you commit to legislating to ensure that every child has a legal right to the 2 years of the ECCE programme? Do you believe that the work childcare professionals do is as important as teachers, and the state needs to pay them in a way that recognises this? And finally, do you agree that a public model of childcare, working alongside private and community providers, is the best way of ensuring that all children and parents have access to affordable and accessible childcare wherever they live in our country?
Thank you, Deputy Taoiseach.
First of all, I'll start by acknowledging the work that the Deputy did when he was Minister in the last government for close to 5 years, responsible for this area. And I hope he acknowledges the commitment of both the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael parties with the Green Party to the issue of childcare during the last government, when it dealt substantially with pay and conditions, and the money was allocated to successive ministers for public expenditure in respect of the agreement with the trade unions in respect of pay and conditions, and the unions acknowledged that at the time. The freeze on increases in terms of the cost of childcare, and then the very significant investment in childcare itself. And what has struck me is when people are in opposition, they talk very nobly and in principle about a public childcare system. I don't see great models. I remember talking to the Social Democrats about this in our preliminary meeting, and there was no detail. Like, just, I remember people saying to me, "Oh, it'll be done gradually, phase basis. We must do an inventory first or an audit." The problem is a bit more complex than that, and we can all commit to a public model. I think there's an obligation, if you're committing, to outline it. What would you do with community playgroups? Would the state take them over? Would the state take over the private sector provision? Or it could be done in a different way. It could be done with special needs first, and the children with additional needs. And there have been a Green Paper as far back as the late 90s suggesting that the state should be more involved and the Department of Education should be more involved in the provision of early-based education for children with special needs. Even if that happened, I think, and the Education Department did get involved in terms of the syllabus, the curriculum, Childcare and all of that, as well as other aspects of it. So I think there's an onus. Like, it's great to make the great announcement. But with respect, Deputy, you were in government for the last 4.5 years. No model came forward to me about a public model for childcare. Because you had to deal with the realities. You had to deal with fiscal realities, budget realities, and you made a lot of progress. We all did collectively in respect of childcare. We need to do an awful lot more, but the fundamental call needs to be made. How do you deal with the existing structures? And Fianna Fáil created an ECHI scheme at the time, and it's been expanded now. And the childcare model has evolved from when it was originally in the Department of Justice through the NOW programme. It's been expanded dramatically through childcare county committees, etc., through different iterations, and now it's in the Department of Children. So I think, to be frank, I think increased resources to childcare, yes.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
Increased expansion of
come
places,
back in,
yes.
Taoiseach. Deputy.
And more resources to try
Deputy Roger O'Gorman.
Thank you, Taoiseach. And look, from my experience over the last 4 years, I'm well aware of those complexities. But I'm also of the strong belief that if we just continue to pump money into the existing system, that sea change that we need to see, ensuring that every child has access to the quality early learning and care that they need, we're not going to be able to deliver that through reliance on the existing system. And there seemed to have been agreement across political parties during the general election, but that desire and that opportunity to provide leadership at the start of a new government is not apparent in your programme for government. And yesterday, in response to a question from Deputy MacDonald on special education, you cited the constitutional right to primary education. But there is no right in the Constitution, or indeed in legislation, to those 2 years of the ECCE programme. And your party promised that in your manifesto, Fine Gael promised it in their manifesto, and there's no reference to it in the programme for government. And that is part of the state taking that greater involvement in the delivery.
Thank you. Time is up. Just before Taoiseach starts, we have a minute's silence after the leaders' questions to commemorate Ukraine's invasion. Thank you, Taoiseach.
In terms of, I mean, to me the issue is allocation of resources primarily, and also working through what we mean by a public health model at this stage. And how you integrate that with the school-based model from, say, 4 years onwards. I mean, that's the big question. And then what's the funding implications of that? And how much would it cost? And how would you plan in terms of the overall allocation of resources to give effect to that? And that's work that can be done. Could usefully be done by an Oireachtas committee in respect of childcare, just like we did in terms of healthcare and other areas in the past. But it does need a fairly detailed analysis and engagement with all of the stakeholders out there in childcare at the moment. We can create legal rights, we can create constitutional rights, but fundamentally the real meat is in the provision of resources, structures and systems that give the desired outcome of access to childcare places for everybody.
Thank you.